think it's very important that we're here today to debating what we can do to improve politics, because I think the public that sent us here expect that. And we know that something needs to be done, and I do hope that the Government is going to live up to the aspirations that is set out in order to offer that change. Now, last week, the Leader of the House was kind enough to mention our previous work together on the exclusion ban, and I'm pleased to confirm that I too look forward to continuing these cross-party efforts in this Parliament. And I know that my honourable friend, the member for Honiton and Sidmouth, will be speaking on second jobs later, so I'm largely going to focus my remarks on the question of modernisation and the Modernisation Committee. Now, I know that the Modernisation Committee set up by the last Labour government was not without controversy, and we should recognise that this is a committee that is not going to be subject to the same selection of the chair and election of the chair. It will be chaired by the Leader of the House. But I have had positive engagement with the Leader of the House as an opposition party member, and I think it is important that we ensure that this committee acts in the best interests of the House and does not supersede the remit of other committees, such as Standards, which I think very importantly has lay members at its heart. But I acknowledge that this is about restoring trust in this place and in our system, and we know that it is needed just by looking at engagement in the recent general election. Voter turnout overall was only 59.8%, so only 6 in 10 registered voters either thought it was worth engaging with our democratic system or indeed could do so. And in many constituencies it was less than this, in some as little as 4 in 10. And I accept that it's not hard to see why when we look back at the last Parliament. We came in 2019, I was one of the new members then, straight in off the backs of the divisions of Brexit, and then normal life and Parliament was paused during the height of the pandemic. And it was just a matter of weeks after we were back in this place following the second lockdown when the former member for North Shropshire, Owen Patterson, was found by the House to have breached the rules on lobbying, and the then government tried to change the rules in relation to House business in order to allow him to escape censure. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I secured the SO24 emergency debate on standards following that. And in order for new members, in order to secure an emergency debate, you need to have 40 members of the House stand up in support of your debate application. And I'm very pleased that, given the increase in Liberal Democrat numbers, I could have mustered those numbers on my party's own basis. But back in 2021, I was very pleased to have MPs from the now government side as well as from the opposition side in support of that standards debate. And looking back in preparation for today, I can see that I closed my speech in that debate with the following remarks, which is this is about trust. It is about trust in the government that they will represent the House and not the government in House business. And it is about trust in us as our constituents' representatives. And that trust, once eroded, is very difficult to regain. Trust in our politics had been eroded in this past week, and that includes all of us here in the House. And on behalf of all our constituents, we must do all in our power to do our best to rebuild that trust as we take the next steps on standards. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do feel that wasn't the case, despite some of our best efforts, those of us that were in the House. And personally, I'm proud to have passed my amendment to our standing orders that stops MPs from voting in relation to their own censure motions, as the former member for North Shropshire had done. And it was with the support of the Leader of the House and the honourable members for Birmingham Yardley and Walthamstow, who's in our place, that we passed the amendment to the exclusion motion earlier this year. And I do hope that that decision by this House sent a message about the seriousness with which we in this place consider the matter of safeguarding. But despite some of those improvements, we still saw rule-breaking, indeed law-breaking, bullying, sexual harassment and a string of serious questions over conflicts of interest. And it is important that we recognise that we are all tarnished by that brush. What the Government is proposing is also about making this a modern workplace. And I think it's easy for people to forget that this is not just a place where politics and policy happens, but it is a place of work. And not just for us here in this chamber, but for hundreds, thousands of MP staff, as well as those in the House who support us. And indeed, as we start this new Parliament with a new intake of MPs, the churn of staff will be significant. Websites advertising political vacancies are currently overflowing with opportunities. But I can't help but wonder, after the last few years, if people will want to come and work here. Can this be seen as an attractive workplace where you can not only be safe but also secure, and where you can forge a meaningful career. And I'm sure we all know people who we think were capable, in fact, more capable than ourselves, of being effective MPs, but who took the decision not to put themselves forward for election. And on that, I hope the Leader of the House will agree, perhaps as part of the committee's work or just generally, to implement the Joe Cox Civility Commission recommendations in relation to the abuse of elected representatives. Now, I have the pleasure of being Chief Whip now to 71 MPs, having welcomed 57 new colleagues to these benches. But I know that the bad behaviour of some cause a lack of trust in all of us. And I was pleased to hear the Leader of the House today to commit to the Modernisation Committee to implementing the independent review of the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme published in May. And I want to draw the House's attention to the third recommendation, which says that if implemented, then if someone makes a complaint to a party about something that falls under the remit of the scheme, then the party have to pass it on to ICGS to be dealt with, rather than attempting to resolve it internally. I'm very aware that the violins for whips are very, very tiny, but they do have a difficult role to do in terms of providing pastoral care, but also looking at discipline. So for me, I think it makes perfect sense to ensure that where there has been inappropriate behaviour, there is a guarantee of an independent review. And I'm pleased to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that what's proposed in this recommendation is already part of the new Liberal Democrat Parliamentary Party's standing orders, and I'd be happy to sign a public declaration accordingly on that basis. I would also urge the Leader of the House to commit to implementing the next steps recommended by the Speakers' Conference, which reported last year. I had the privilege of sitting on the conference and can attest to the time and cross-party work that went into that report. And these package of changes together would create something much closer to a modern HR system, which will benefit staff and MPs. I think the public do accept that MPs are different in that we aren't employees, but they also expect us to adopt modern HR practices where we possibly can. And the underlying point for me, and something I hope that our new MPs can take on board amongst the excitement and honour of being in this place, is this: that our jobs are unusual, but that does not make us special or different when it comes to upholding basic standards. And as I say that as a former police officer who was also not an employee during that time. It does not give us free rein to treat others poorly. We mustn't break the rules. In fact, we ought to be aspiring to a higher standard, to be exemplary, because these unusual and wonderful jobs that we get to hold and do for our constituents. But we do also need to look, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the practices and support in place to allow members to carry out their work effectively. I was disappointed to hear, for example, that the nursery here in Parliament can only offer places from 2026, when we have increasing numbers of new members coming here with family responsibilities. We need to ensure that we give people the support in order to carry out that really important job to the best of our abilities. But returning to the motion, the question of what the Modernisation Committee should be considering, modernisation isn't just about standards and behaviour and making this a 21st century workplace. It is about making this a modern system which is fit for policy decisions to be made for the benefits of our constituents. A workplace that ensures democracy works. And the first proposal I'm going to ask the Leader of the House to consider, which I accept might not be in our party's best interests as they want to power through those first 100 days, but in the spirit of putting democracy first, I urge her to be open, and that is revisiting the right reforms and reviewing the determination of House time. The 2009 report recommended that House Business Committee, made up on a crossbench basis, be able to decide how much time is given to scrutinising government legislation. Now, this might sound boring and technical, but I do think it would be revolutionary. The government would still be able to set the agenda, bring its manifesto forward and its legislation accordingly, but it couldn't tell us in opposition how much time we should take to properly scrutinise it. Now, the right reforms were aimed at ending sleaze and making Parliament and the role of Parliament more meaningful, and those goals remain ever more relevant today. And implementing this last change from the right reform recommendations would make MPs more powerful in representing their constituents. It would connect us in a meaningful way, and it would allow the public to see that MPs are working on their behalf. And it would certainly improve debate, something that I am hoping will improve in this new Parliament. It will make us more open and allows the public to truly understand the nuances and difficulties that have to be handled in legislation. And indeed, I would argue in this way, it would also benefit the government. A modern Chamber of Representatives also needs to be fairly elected. How many times have we heard someone sigh in the radio, in the pub, and moan that politicians are all the same? that nothing ever changes and that one candidate will inevitably win, so there is no point in even engaging. There has been so much optimism in Parliament since the general election and new members have been returned. I want to ensure that we spread that optimism out to each and every voter, a sense that they matter, that politics and Parliament is for them. And I do have to say that a fair voting process is the absolute basic step that we need to take. I heard the Honourable Member for Ashford's comments earlier in the debate. I can assure him that the Liberal Democrats have only for the first time actually delivered the number of MPs that is reflective of the voter share that they had in the general election. We'll await the outcome of the Electoral Commission's report on the most recent election before we draw any conclusions, especially when it comes to voter turnout. But in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I and my party look forward to engaging further with the Modernisation Committee, and I would urge the Leader of the House not to narrow its remit. Modernising this place is a big job, but it's surely a worthwhile one, because if we can get that right, we rebuild the trust that underpins our democracy and make the laws and the policies that come from this place all the better for it. Thank you.